And happy Monday to you. Today, we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorite poems, Rita Dove's Canary. You'll remember some things about Rita Dove. We studied her back in the fall. We had looked very closely at her poem called Primer or Primer. We discussed the ambiguity of that. As a reminder, she was born in Akron and she's still alive. In your anthology, you have a lot of her work, and so you can explore it further. This poem was written in 1989. Canary, from Michael S. Harper. Billie Holiday's burned voice had as many shadows as lights, a mournful candelabra against a sleek piano, the gardenia, her signature, under that ruined face. Now you're cooking, drummer to bass, magic spoon, magic needle, take all day if you have to, with your mirror and your bracelet of song. Fact is, the invention of women under siege has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. If you can't be free, be a mystery. There's a few things that I want you to notice just visually. Observe how the line gets longer in the beginning, and we have pretty smooth set here, and we also have a small extension before we shoot to a short line. The first two stanzas are made up of 4 lines each. There's a very slight rhyme connection between face and base, but otherwise it's mostly unrhymed. And we go from 4 lines to 1. And so there's this idea of synthesis. She's going to start with a bigger idea and move into a simple statement. Let's start with the title. The title comes from an idiom, which is a canary in a coal mine, or a caged canary. And what these canaries were used for is miners would put them in a cage, and when they descended into the mine, they would wait to see if the bird could sing. And so long as the bird was alive, they knew that the poison gases weren't there and it was safe to work. Safe, relatively. So one of the things to think about is the ways in which maybe somebody like Billie Holiday is caged, or any of the other readers. This title should also remind you of Maya Angelou, whose caged bird we studied last semester. There's a few things that I want to point out in terms of vocabulary in the first stanza. And the first is this idea we start with Billie Holiday's burned voice. Billie Holiday was a singer, and she was very famous for her voice. Here's an example. Rita Dove is trying to capture here is this idea of it being burned, this almost ruinous word. What has happened that caused her to burn her voice? Biographically, you can connect it to substance abuse, but I think that there's more going on here with Dove's poem than just emphasizing those elements, even though we're going to see them. For instance, she very elegantly picks up on the burned to connect it to a candelabra. A candelabra is a candle holder. So you might think of Lumiere from Beauty and the Beast. And then we move to her face, where she has a gardenia, which is a very prominent flower, and she was known for wearing it on stage. And so we move from voices to faces. And there we also have kind of a slight rhyme connecting those things. And notice we have shadows and lights. We're putting things into alternative perspectives, but it's not black and white. Right? It's shadow and light. And notice it's lights cast shadows. And so there's this sense that it creates its own mystery or darkness. We have a brilliant use of adjectives. Billie Holiday's burned voice, mournful candelabra, sleek piano, ruined face. I'm particularly struck by mournful candelabra and sleek piano. Mournful, of course, indicates sorrow or being in mourning, while candelabras indicate brightness. And so there's this oxymoron almost, where it's a sadness is next to the thing that's light, which you can connect to shadows and lights. Similarly, sleek piano. Sleek is when something is almost seems to be shining. It's so smooth. And so the piano, the notes of the piano can be sleek, but also the way it's been polished makes it sleek. And you might associate pianos with like being a black instrument in terms of painted black. And so then we have dark brightness out of darkness as well. And then finally, ruined face. So we started with a burned voice and a ruined face. And one of the things that I'm going to be arguing for later on is that this is the language of destruction. And it's almost as though the body of Billie Holiday is what is under attack. Stanza 2 has one of the greatest uses of parentheses that I know. Now you're cooking drummer to bass, magic spoon, magic needle. Take all day if you have to with your mirror and your bracelet of song. One thing to notice is in the second stanza, or in the first stanza, we had past tense verbs, burned voice, had shadows, whereas now we have the present tense. Now you're cooking drummer to bass, magic spoon, magic needle, take all day if you have to with your mirror, right? This present tense that we're in. And we've shifted also the speaker. We're no longer describing Billie Holiday. Instead, the drummer is talking to the bass player. Now you're cooking. There's something that happens here where we're going to run a set of polyvalent terms. So with cooking, it means you're doing really great work. Like, yeah, man, you're cooking, you're hitting the rhythms. But it also has to do perhaps with the language of creating drugs. Like you melt the drugs on the spoon, which then you take into your body through the needle. And this is the line that I think you can really put a lot of force on if you want to make an argument that this has to do with some kind of history of substance abuse. Take all day if you have to is an interesting, there's something subtle there. So Billie Holiday was also known as Lady Day. And there's this sense of get yourself ready, prepare who you're going to be your performance self if you have to. And that's why we get the sense of with your mirror and your bracelet of song. So take as much time as you need to become Lady Day, who's the performer, using your mirror to get ready, and then your bracelet of song, this idea of the decoration. However, bracelet is very, very interesting because, as you know, they go around something. And so the bracelets could refer to handcuffs. I think they also might refer to the two different parentheses here. It's wrapped around this stanza. And it's also like her bracelet of song. It's the way that she connects to things around her. Mirror has another potential to be related to drug use in terms of snorting cocaine. But again, I don't think you need to run the drug line. I think it exists there simultaneously as just describing preparing to be a performer that everybody expects you to. And this is one of the things that I think this poem is really exploring, is the idea of public expectations on performers, and specifically female performers of color. Then we come to the last two stanzas. Fact is, the invention of women under siege has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. Rita Dove is playing with a series of conflicting terms here in an amazing way. Starts with fact is, and then immediately moves to invention and ends with myth. None of these things are facts. It's things that have been created or invented to create stories. The syntax, the grammar, also breaks down after the fact is. And so we have almost a failure of language at this point in a really provocative way. And what is Dove exploring here? Well, she's making a statement that women under siege is an idea that's been created to sharpen love in the service of myth. Well, the myth, I think, is the myth of celebrity. And this love that we get that's sharpened is fans, or anybody that's interested in the personal lives of celebrity. And here I think you get this great connection to people have celebrated or discussed more Billie Holiday's ruined voice, right? The tragedy in her life, rather than celebrated her poetic invention or her abilities. And there's this sense almost that she's even more famous because of the tragedy. And what Dove is pointing out is that this is part of a pattern of behavior that public fans are guilty of. And then she ends with this phenomenal line, if you can't be free, be a mystery. all of these repetitive sounds of E, be free, be mystery. And I want you to really think about this line. Like, if you can't be free, be a mystery. This sense of maybe create your own false narrative, your own myth. But what does it say about what is freedom? That's where we get a really interesting idea. And it's one that I'm going to ask you guys to think more about. In terms of connecting this to other things that you'll read, one of the specific interests of Rita Dove is in classical Greek and Roman mythology. And Women Under Siege is like the origin of storytelling in that tradition in a lot of ways. The Roman historian Herodotus will point specifically to the theft of Helen at the start of the Iliad, which is the start of the Trojan War. It's kind of kicking off all of this tradition and history. Rita Dove is also very interested in the myth of Persephone. She wrote a few different poems. She wrote a whole poem cycle exploring it. And in that, in a poem called The Hymn to Demeter, which if you take my mythology class, you will read, we learn about the theft of Persephone by Hades, which might be a story that some of you are familiar with. And so you can look forward to reading the Iliad in 10th grade and then in college, the mythology with me. So here's a few further considerations, and I went a little wild on this one. So number one, and you're going to just toss these up on the forum. Do you agree with Dove's last line? If you can't be free, be a mystery. Is the choice between being free or a mystery? What might freedom mean? 2, in your favorite shows or series or books, individual books, do you see versions of women being defined by their tragedy? A creative topic. Pick a singer and try to describe their voice, thinking carefully about adjectives and metaphors. 4, look out the window and wait to spot a bird. Write about what you think that bird feels. What's going through the bird's head? 5, listen to a song by Billie Holiday and then tell us about it over on the forum. She has a very famous but difficult song called Strange Fruit that you might get a lot out of by listening to it, especially if you think of Langston Hughes and the work that we were doing with him last semester. The title Strange Fruit refers to lynchings. So just be aware going in that that's the topic of that particular song. All right. I hope you enjoyed this poem. I think there's a lot more to tease out about those last lines, especially in what's happening there with this, the invention and the myth. So maybe keep thinking about that. And I look forward to talking about Gatsby with you on Tuesday.